Another groundbreaking idea, fertilizer. These days it takes farming on an industrial scale to keep our stomachs full. We produce over 2,000 million tons of cereals every year. That's the weight of the Great Pyramid 400 times over. We have 7 billion humans to feed, and even more pigs. Add 17 billion chickens to that number, and you can see how many mouths we actually have to feed in total. As the old saying goes, you are what you heap. Fertilizer is a truly great idea that changed the world of food production forever. And the idea grew from here at Rothamsted Manor in southern England. Run by Keith Goulding, it's the oldest soil research centre in the world.
So the big idea is artificial nitrogen fertilizer. We're really talking about something which completely changed the face of the world, the face of food production, and indeed the future for human beings.
These guys know a thing or two about fertilizer. They've been digging holes here for 150 years, and they've extracted 150,000 soil samples. The precious substance they're after is nitrogen, and they've been chasing it since the Industrial Revolution.
Population growth was a particular problem in Britain at the time because it was a burgeoning industrial country. The people working in the factories, in the cities, in the towns, they weren't growing their own food anymore, and so agriculture had to supply that food.
It was no secret that fertilizer was handy. Farmers had been getting their hands dirty for thousands of years.
The ancient Egyptians put ashes on the soil because they knew it was a benefit. The Greeks and the Romans added manure and seashells and clay and all sorts of waste materials, but they didn't know why it gave any benefit.
The man who found out why was the Victorian scientist John Laws.
What Laws did was to establish that plants got their nutrients from the soil, and also that the main nutrient that controlled crop growth was nitrogen.
Laws turned the fields of Rothamsted Manor into an outdoor laboratory, dividing them into small strips.
So this is where Laws began his experiments, and this is the plot that gets manure, which would have been the control. FYM stands for farmyard manure. That means it's cattle manure from a farmyard. It's been applied since 1844, virtually the beginning of the experiment. And N0, that means that there's no nitrogen fertilizer added to this plot.
Like a true Victorian entrepreneur, Laws was after a better, man-made manure that he could sell at a profit.
This is plot 16. This is the best crop of wheat. Gets something like 280 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. And that's what a modern variety of wheat needs, really, to give it the best yield. The experiment showed that if you put nitrogen on the crop, the yields go up 3 to 4 times.
Job done. Well, no actually, because Laws couldn't produce it on a large scale. So, the world had to wait until 1909, when the German scientist Fritz Haber had his wunderbar moment. Haber found a way to harness nitrogen straight from the air we breathe, and his chemical process is still in use today. Here's how it works. Free nitrogen can be extracted from the air as ammonia, which is nitrogen and hydrogen combined, and from that they can create little white pellets full of nitrogen for farmers to use.
That's been called the most important scientific development of the 20th century, and you can see why when you look at how the population has increased since then.
Fertilizers can't grow babies, of course, but you see the connection. This process allows us to supply 40% of the world's population with food.
So we're moving on to plot number 3, and as it says, it's nil. That means it's had no fertilizer, no manure for 167 years. And if you look at the crop that's growing, how thin it is, how little wheat you'd actually get from it, you can see what happens if you don't add fertilizer or manure.
So it seems these fertilizers have done us a favour. But not everyone is happy that we rely on this stuff, as it uses up fossil fuels and it consumes 2% of the world's energy supply. That's the same as the entire energy consumption of South Korea.
Some people would say that we'd be better off without artificial fertilizer because we've become dependent on something that's produced with fossil fuels, and therefore it's not sustainable. But for me, a process that supports 40% of the world's population must be one of the most important developments of the 20th century.
You have a point, sir. But coming up, we'll be serving you an even more generous portion of the great ideas that change the world. We're talking food preservation and the super plant.